Welcome, everybody. We are talking to Dr. Graham Mclennan from Orange. He's a dentist, but much more than a dentist. He's been a pioneer in Christian radio, a pioneer in Christian schooling, a pioneer in politics in the area of Christian values. He's pioneered prayer and been part of some massive prayer events across this nation, not once, but many times. And he has got so much to share, and he's played a central role in the founding of the Canberra Declaration. Great to be talking to you today, Graham.
Yep, great to be with you, Warwick.
Graham, how did you first come to a knowledge of Jesus Christ?
Well, I grew up out west, and I didn't go to church at all, and they were pagan Presbyterians really in my family because we were out on a farm and pretty isolated between Dubbo and Gilgandra. But I was supposed to go to university on the farm, but I was felt I should do a profession when I went to Hurlston Agricultural High School, where actually I got honours in agriculture, but most people did when they went to Hurlston. But at university in my third year, I really was feeling hollow, and I was trying to pursue the normal things that young people do and partying and so on, and really felt hollow. In actual fact, I'd gone out on 10 dates to 10 different balls, and I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. And but then a fellow who'd failed his year in dentistry and wondered why, he led me to the Lord, and through a group called WEC, Worldwide Evangelisation Crusade. He went on to be a missionary, but I remember kneeling by my bed and praying a prayer, and then I went forward there when I publicly confessed Christ and went forward. And then I read a book by Norman Grubb, on a fellow C.T. Studd, who was actually a world famous cricketer at that time. And he went on the mission field, and it was described his total consecration, his dedication, commitment. So I felt I should be doing that myself. So that's how I was totally committed, I guess, and fully consecrated. And then, of course, I was called up for the Vietnam War while I was at university, and spent 2 years in the army as a dentist.
2 years in the army as a dentist. So you've not only been a dentist, but you've been involved in the army too, eh?
Yeah, I was attached to the artillery. They're the big guns, and quite frankly, if it wasn't for the artillery, the battle of Long Tan, there would have been hundreds and hundreds of more casualties, because it was the artillery that was called in and fought off the Viet Cong, and that's why they had so many casualties, because it was so close to the base that they could use the artillery. So we were spared many lives really during the battles there, and certainly. It's interesting because I lost a child from a cot death right towards the end, and we had compassionate leave and so on. And the only two guys that I could comfort me were two chaplains that were on the base at Holsworthy that would have to go and tell mums and their sweethearts and so on that their loved ones had died over in Vietnam. And those two guys comforted me, and it was simply something that happened to Jesus. You know, God really turned his back on Jesus for a moment, because in Isaiah it says he couldn't face death or see death. So it is interesting, because in John 12:2-24 it talks about unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground, it abides alone, but if it dies, it bears lots of fruit. And so that was a word to me personally, that God was on my case about bearing fruit. And I think sharing this with many people, I believe that Ephesians 2:10 is very important, that we have works for us in future to do, and God is preparing us to do those works. So we need to be conscious of God preparing works for us to do, as mentioned in Ephesians 2:10. So I just leave those thoughts with you. And that was 86 Woodside Avenue, because I live in Woodward, so you better have to fix that up.
It's all good, buddy. It's all good. And so from there, you got married. Of course, you were married at that stage.
Yeah, just got married. Had my honeymoon in the army.
Honeymoon in the army?
Yeah.
And in 74 was a very special year for you. Why? Tell us about 74. You travelled overseas. Where did you go?
Yeah, well, we settled in Orange because we weren't capable of studying, because we just lost a child from a cot death, and I held it dead in my arms. I just couldn't believe this, because I felt the Lord tell us that he'd give us a double blessing, and of course it came in the natural with identical twins, and then the Lord takes the firstborn. which is not that unusual, really, because if you look even in the early chapters of Genesis, you see how God used the firstborn, and sometimes he didn't. He chose the secondborn, but certainly when Egypt, the firstborn were taken, and then they were consecrated in Exodus 2 when they came out of Egypt. So we decided when we settled in Orange, and that was a beautiful thing that happened too, because God provided us a home, this big old home for $6,000, which today would be worth lots more than $6,000, I can tell you. But we felt we should go overseas because what we'd learn, we wouldn't learn in Orange or perhaps in church. But so we were going to use this big old home, but some people call it a mansion. Never thought it was called a mansion, but we had 9 bedrooms in it at the time. But we trained with Teen Challenge, and so in both California and New York, and basically in Brooklyn, where Teen Challenge was based, and it wasn't with. It was with actually Ralph Wilkinson rather than the David Wilkinson that most people know about, but with Ralph, and we're in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, but we're nearly killed twice. I was over in the Bronx, but certainly my family were nearly wiped out. We were just spared by 2 patrol cars as we arrived in Brooklyn. But we also learned a lot of conflict issue, remedial type things with Bill Gothard's Institute and Basic Life Principles, which a lot of groups such as YWAM uses, Cornerstone and others, to understand and Teen Challenge, how to resolve youth conflicts. And a lot of adult conflicts are basically youth conflicts. So we went there, and we also lived in the Chuck Smith's Calvary Chapel community for several weeks, probably a month or so. And that's the first time I ever tasted revival. And another time was a bit later on when we went to Ann Arbor, a community that was near the university there, and in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was a beautiful place where the worship was brilliant. It was interdenominational. Everybody from most denominations were accepted, and it was a beautiful environment. So having tasted revival, it's something you have a longing for. And really, California was in revival at that time, particularly Orange County. So that's one thing that happened in '74. But another thing that happened, it was actually cheaper to go to Europe than to just go to the west coast of the United States and travel overland. It was cheaper for some reason or other to have a stopover in Europe, a compulsory one. So we stayed and studied under Dr. Francis Schaeffer at L'Abri. And there we learned about Abraham Kuyper and others, and a bloke called Cornelius Van Til, who were, of course, philosophers. And these guys talked about spheres. And Kuyper was a great example because Kuyper became Prime Minister of Holland, and he founded a Free Amsterdam University, and he also had his own newspaper, had his own theological denomination, really. So he was into the sphere. So people think it's just a recent thing, but no, it's been around for centuries.
Graham, you mentioned Francis Schaeffer. Now, tell us some of the books he's written. A lot of people might know, but Francis Schaeffer was one of the original pioneers of Christian values in government, Christian values in community.
Great influence.
And transformation of nations, long before the transformation movement in the 90s. Yep. Tell us about, in 1 minute, tell us about Francis Schaeffer.
Well, I've got to tell you a story about the guy I sat next to. And all I knew that his name was Michael. And he left, and then I was told that he was the son of the President of the United States, Ford. So it was interesting because I think that the books that we had to read before we went there are only several of them. There was The God Who Is There, Escape from Reason, and He's There and He's Not Silent. But the one that really, I think, influenced many people was How Shall We Then Live? And Chuck Colson wrote one of a similar title. And it talks about the Escape from Reason is very good, how thought has developed throughout the West and how pietism came in, and there was a secularism developed simply because of the pietist movement and the fact that people retreated from the public square and weren't public Christians anymore. So this is where this so-called domain theology comes in, sphere theology, and how we need to be in the marketplace. And Jesus was always in the marketplace. But there's been a movement where Schaeffer thought, well, it was the mediocrity of the church was appalling, and so we really felt that we should get into issues, which we did through other groups like the Festival of Light here back in New South Wales. And I got involved with Fred Nile and helped put him into Parliament. I nearly got elected with him in 1981. And Fred and I have been involved in Parliament for 39 years now, so it'll be his 40th next year. So
you actually, let me interrupt you, you actually not only studied under Schaefer and read his books, but you actually came back and put that into action.
Yeah, that's why we got involved in government. We got involved in education through founding a Christian school here. We thought that was essential because we understood what the end product of secularism is, and that's making God irrelevant. And that's what the very purpose of it has been. And it's regarded as a religion in the United States, secular humanism, but we don't know what to make of it. We just think secular schools are just wonderful because we got some SRE and other opportunities. But really, we got involved in media as well and commenced a Christian radio station here in the 90s. And because I was the chairman of that and the manager for some time, we got together with a few others who are like-minded from Geelong and Canberra and Newcastle and other places up at Port Macquarie, in Warwick and so on. And so we got together, some of these CEOs, and founded the UCB Australia, which is now Vision Christian Media, which now has over 700 stations. And Ian and I...
Just help me, Graham. So, essentially you got so inspired from being working with and sitting under Francis Schaeffer and Labrie in Switzerland, reading his books. Yeah. Obviously, you were interested in drug rehabilitation as well. That's why you went to New York to study under David Wilkerson, Ralph Wilkerson. But you actually came back to Australia and you got involved in politics. And you were a member of the Liberal Party at one stage, correct? Yeah.
Well, I just walked down with a mate because they were trying to increase the membership of the party. So I walked down there in 1980 and became a member. And in the late 70s, and I became the president within a year. I was the president of the state electorate, and then I was elected to the state executive. Yeah, with people like John Howard. And actually, in fact, I was on the policy committee, and within a week or two of suggesting something, I could hear them say that on the media, that the state leader was saying that because I was on their policy committee. So it's
but then you realised that the Liberal Party at that stage weren't championing Christian values, and Fred Nile, who was an evangelist, who was quite involved with the Festival of Light, working with different people from America and Malcolm Muggeridge and Mother Teresa. You actually linked in and stood for Parliament in 1981 on his ticket. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was second. He asked me because he didn't know much about politics. In actual fact, he didn't want to go into politics. He was trying to convince others who'd been mayors and so on, and no one was willing. And then the Lord said, "Fred, you're it." So, and then because he heard of me through an auntie of mine who's working for Fred and the Liberal Party, and so he connected with me and he asked me to stand with him. So I did, and I spent a lot of time from a surgery. It cost me a lot of money just to maintain the practice with paying staff and so on. But we got Fred into Parliament, and this is virtually every town in New South Wales in the early 80s. And then I stood for the Senate myself in 84 and got the highest Senate vote that we've ever had with the CDP. So it was an interesting experience, but I lost the fire in the belly. You can't handle it for too long. It's just, I think it's just too stressful, and particularly on your family. Some of the wives get very...
I think, I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of different parliamentarians, Labor, Liberal, all the different sides, also working closely with Fred Nile as well. And the cost, Graham, the human cost. There's a very high personal cost of standing for Parliament in the public space, and then being a Christian and standing for Parliament is even tougher, isn't it?
Yeah, but as an independent, you can, you don't have to compromise. You can stand on the word of God, and this is what's happening a lot of time. And even with our present Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who's in the Liberal Party, there are Christians who are condemning him because he doesn't appear to be a Christian, but he's not in a Christian party. And that's what they don't understand. And what I would really recommend is that they join a party themselves so they become more Christian. We need to be salt and light, or else we're trodden underfoot. And it's interesting because Fred was an evangelist, and even I had some evangelistic training, and we even had Will Graham. In actual fact, Will was here just for his meetings, and he was, of course, Franklin's
Will
son.
Graham is the son. We've got to tell everybody he's the grandson of Billy Graham.
Yeah, that's right. So, and he's just more like his grandfather than his father, Will. So, so there's an interesting. We had interesting times, Fred and I. But I finally, in actual fact, I stood in the late 90s for the Senate too. But it was, it's time to move on and do other things too. So, so there's actually right from today, there's a person resigned from, give notice in the Liberal Party as a cabinet minister because it's been too much for him and he's moving on. So he's going to work to the end of the year and leave the Liberal Party's in the federal government under Scott Morrison.
So you're, just some mate on this and finish on this, you would actually encourage Christians to either get involved as a voice in the public square or join a party, whether it's a Labor, a Liberal or Christian Democratic Party, join a party and get involved. Would that be your encouragement?
Amen. You've got to, because we're being trodden underfoot, even the whole education system with secular humanism. I mean, this is where we get all these safe schools programs and a lot of this stuff. They're not mucking about. I'd actually like to quote you something, what the secular humanists believe. Because
I'd be very interested in that, Graham. Far away.
Because I've just got it here. Now, this is in regards to Madeleine O'Hare, and she was the one who tossed out prayer in American schools. She says this, and her son. But anyway, this is from the Humanist in January, February 1983. The battle for mankind's future must be waged and won in the public schools classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their roles as the proselytisers of a new faith. These teachers must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rapid fundamentalist preachers, for they will be ministers of another sort, utilising the classroom instead of the pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach, regardless of educational level, preschool, normal school, daycare or large state university. The classroom must and will become an area of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity together with all its adjacent evils and misery and the new faith of humanism. Now, the son of Madeleine O'Hare publicly apologised to Americans God for his part in building this personal empire of hers. And he says this, looking back, and this is in 1980, looking back on the 33 years of life I wasted without faith and without God, I pray that I may be able to correct just some of the wrongs I have created, said William J. Murray of Houston in a letter to the editor of the Austin American Statesman. Murray, who was converted to Christianity since he split with his mother in the 1970s, was the plaintiff in a suit filed in Massachusetts that resulted in compulsory prayers being banned from public schools. I'd like to apologise to the people of Austin for the part I played in the building of the personal empire of Madeleine O'Hare, that's his mother. My efforts to that end were an affront to the people of Austin, the people of the nation, and to God. My crime was twofold in that I was aware of the wrong of my actions at the time and continued them for the purpose of financial profit. I was continuing to practice the hateful anti-moral way of life I'd learned from birth as in an atheist home. I loathe the idea that I lowered myself to the editing of her anti-God magazine. And he says, I could say more about that, but so looking back on the 33 years of life I wasted without faith and with God, I pray that I may be able to correct just some of the wrong I have created. The part I played as a teenager in removing prayer from public schools was criminal. I removed from our future generations that short time each day which should rightly be reserved for God. Inasmuch as the suit to destroy the tradition of prayer in school was brought in my name, I feel gravely responsible for the resulting destruction of the moral fibre of our youth that it has caused.
And that was in the Dallas Times Herald, May 10, 1980. Yep. And in 1980, you also went to the Washington for Jesus rally.
My word.
And again, you're not a person that just talks about stuff. You're a person that does stuff. And you came back to Australia. In 1986, you started the National Alliance for Christian Leaders. Yes. Tell us what the National Alliance, how it started, and what is the National Alliance of Christian Leaders? Great.
Well, we're going around with Fred. I realised we weren't at first base, convincing Christians to be involved in our society. There's the compassionate rails and looking after the elderly and a few other things and youth clubs and so on. But not involved in the public arena. And so we felt we should network. And the National Alliance of Christian Leaders is a networking group of mainly conservative Christian groups who wanted to change and transform our nation. So the view was for national transformation in 1986 when it was founded, and then we later went and was involved in, and from my experiences with the Washing for Jesus rally, we started the Canberra Declaration, and the National Gathering was before that, of course. The National Gathering in 1988 was a prayer gathering and many people, and it was about 40,000 people turned up to that when Bob Hawke wouldn't open it in prayer. But
now we've got some pictures here, Graham. Let me just find them, and I just think it'd be nice for people to see exactly what this really was. And I can't find how to share the screen after all that. Where is share the screen? Oh, here it is. Sorry, guys. Here we've got it. And this is the gathering. This is a picture. What's this picture, Graham? Just quickly tell us.
That's in 1988. And that's when we marched around Parliament House in May and proclaimed...
How many Christians were there, Graham? How many Christians?
40,000. There could have been less or more. But that number may be more, but there are obviously some coming and going the whole time. So that's why at any given time. But if you look there, some of them are about 15 wide right around the state circle. So that's a fair few people. And I was in charge of that group there. That's why I could take photos as they marched by. And there would have been 8,000, at least 8 to 10,000 in that group, just in one park alone. So,
because I was there myself, and for me, it was one of the greatest days of my whole life. You were the treasurer, if I remember rightly, on the managing committee.
Yep. Yeah, I can tell you lots of stories about that too.
Had to find the funds to make this work. And thank God you did. And it really goes back to the fact that Mr. Bob Hawke refused because he was an agnostic.
Yeah.
He was brought up by a Methodist father.
Congregational.
Congregational
pastor.
But ultimately turned away from God and refused to open Parliament House in prayer.
Yeah.
And so 50,000 Christians gathered from all over Australia to open Parliament House in prayer.
Yeah.
And that was quite an historic moment, wasn't it?
It was. And it was very uplifting and edifying and encouraging for all of us as we prayed right through the night. And we prayed for all of Australia at that time. And there were people that came on horses and came by foot and came on buses. And we tried to even organise a jumbo jet to fly in, but that couldn't be organised. But certainly busloads came from every state and territory in Australia. And so there would have been 40,000. We know that there were at least 35,000 because the Granny Smith apples came from where I just had lunch today in Lake Canobbas, where the orchard was. So a Christian guy donated apples. So, and there were 30-odd thousand apples there.
And so that set the stage too. I believe it had quite a significant effect on Australia, the National Gathering. And then many years later, we started working together on the Christian Values Checklist in 1999.
Yeah.
I think that was the very first one that we did together.
Yep.
And Steve Blizzard gave us a bit of wisdom how to set it up.
Yeah.
But you and I, with Bill Muhlenberg and several others, helped create that first Christian Values Checklist.
Yeah.
And then
the states.
We've done that for actually every election since then for the last 20 years now.
Yeah. Mm.
And you helped in that took a significant role in the Christian Values Checklist.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, we first heard about the Manhattan Declaration.
That's right.
Tell us about the Manhattan Declaration.
Well, I heard about the Manhattan Declaration. I thought, oh, that's very good. And a number of people involved in that, including Chuck Colson. And then I thought, oh, that's very good for America. And then when they commenced the Westminster Confession, the Westminster Declaration in England, I thought, we've got to do one too. So I rang up Bill Muhlenberg, who I thought could write a decent one. And so he said, yeah, we've got to do this, Graham. And then we thought about it.
I think you'd rung me at the same time, hadn't you?
Yeah, well, we thought about it, and then rang you and say, you were the original three of us. And so so you took it because you could manage that. You had the office and the facilities to manage.
Now, if I remember rightly, Graham, you were talking about it, and you involved me. It definitely the first idea was yourself. We talked to Bill. We talked to ourselves. We chatted on the phone. We all wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And about a month before, you rang me up and said, Marshy, if you don't hurry up and get this done, me and Bill are going to do it ourselves.
That's right, my word, because you're a bit slow off the mark. I'll tell you what, you're pretty quick off the mark, but this time you weren't. You're dragging your feet, Warwick, I'll tell you. But it was...
And so we got, if I remember rightly, Bill did about probably close to 70. Well, he did a whole draft.
Yeah, he did it. Yeah.
Warwick Marsh attacked it. We both attacked it.
Yeah, we wanted to shorten it.
We wanted to shorten it, number one. We took out a reference to the Muslim faith because that was a whole other issue we felt we didn't want to sort of tackle because it's we just wanted to keep it on life, marriage, family, faith and freedom, correct?
Yep.
And our Judeo-Christian values. That was the agreement, wasn't it?
That's right. The way to overcome evil is by doing good. We need to have a stand of righteousness, and when the enemy comes in like a flood, we've got to raise up a declaration standard. And it wasn't my idea really, or it was God's idea, just the Lord, I think. Yeah. We get to these things, and if you don't pray about it, and if you don't get a word from the Lord, you're wasting your time.
And so
builds a house, those are
what happened was we kept on working in it. Bill was very unhappy with us both, if I remember rightly.
He was.
We kept involving all these Anglican bishops, Catholic bishops,
that's right.
pastors, evangelical leaders, Pentecostal leaders, because you and I knew we had to get a lot of buy-in from a lot of
good consensus, people. A broad church consensus.
Broad consensus.
Yeah.
And, and then what happened was we actually, together, we worked it. I did a lot of the sort of shop work in the actual
you did work. You put a lot of work in. You put a lot of work into these things over the years.
And so and then we actually almost had it done, and we suddenly realised, wait a second, what are we going to do to release it? And tell us what happened. You were speaking at a very special conference. Tell us about it.
Well, Barbara and Norman Miller invited me to a God and Government seminar, which actually we had one, NACL, National Alliance.
Actually, it was a God and Government conference, to be precise.
Yes. The
God and Government conference at Parliament House in Canberra, in the Parliament, in the theaterette.
That's right. Theaterette. That's right. So Barbara was gracious enough because I think I spoke to her. It's difficult, in those days to speak to two people on the phone. But anyway, we got our mobiles and speakerphone and everything these days. We're very modern, but both of them consented to having me present the declaration there. So I did so within the theaterette in Parliament House before about 120 people, and then later on, immediately outside on the lawns where, of course, that little video was filmed.
Now we're going to play that video now, again, I've just jumped the gun, so I'm going to have to find it and go to it. And here it is here. I'll just come back to you and...
We've been working on a Canberra declaration for the last 3 or 4 months, and we released it this morning, and we hope to have thousands sign that. We actually had a background of people look at it, and that background of people included evangelicals, Pentecostals, numerous people such as Baptists, and also bishops from the Anglican and Catholic churches.
Many of us here on the lawns of Parliament House, we are here to see changes that are good changes that are ordained and will always be of his purposes and plans. I think it's important that even in this election, there's many that stand here today and certainly praying, Christians all within this nation. And we want to see many of these things that have been brought forth, the Canberra Declaration, and really that those that are in public office really take on board.
Our forefathers came here from the nations to this nation of.
And that was Barbara Miller, the wife of Norman Miller, the pastor there, who was sharing. And that was a very momentous occasion. I was there, and I was actually the guy filming it. It was a very powerful event, wasn't it, Graham?
I think the important thing is, and we should recognise, and I understand that, and many of us do, that we feel that with Indigenous people, that revival will come from them. I think there's a number of reasons for that, and believing that as a prior people, that that we had the honour of having Norman Miller there addressing us too. So it was a beautiful time together, and a time of we felt victory, and just like the national gathering, I think the heavens were open, spiritually, for some reason or other, because there's another time we had reconciliation. We had it many times over the years, but certainly in 1988 with the national gathering, and their pictures as well there to show us having reconciliation with Aboriginal people. And they brought actually from a massacre site the two of the old fence posts and put them together as a cross, the Mile Creek massacre. And so we felt that we should try and honour them in the way and be at peace. And so there wouldn't be all this bitterness that's now creating our country and the denial of even our history. It's good that Barbara said that, they've joined in with the new nation, which had a Christian foundation, and they could have had other countries settle here. They could have been those from the north, the Muslims, the Hindus, Chinese, but they were prevented from coming down, and like an invisible line above Australia. And also because of the Treaty of Zaragoza, the Portuguese and Spanish couldn't come, because that's where basically the Western Australia, Northern Territory, South Australia border is, and they didn't want to come there to upset each other because there were some disputes between the Spanish and the Portuguese.
It's interesting because I look back on that day, and I don't think, although I think you could see how far-reaching, you encouraged me and said, Warwick, this could actually launch a ministry. But I don't think I realised that, Graham. I honestly thought that it was we're just doing a declaration. We might get 5,000, 10,000 signatures on that declaration. But within a matter of, 3 months, we had 35,000 people on the declaration. And today we've got 86,000, almost 87,000 people who've signed the Canberra Declaration. It's quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we thought, well, perhaps NACCL could do it, but that's why I rang you up and I said, look, Warwick, I don't believe in sort of reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. It's a waste of time. And if people have ministries there that can serve us or thing like that, that's what the National Alliance of Christian Leaders is about, helping one another. And that's why I rang up and said, look, Warwick, you've got to take this on. So you did, thankfully.
Yeah, look, it was a very historic day. And looking back, it was wonderful that we did have Pastor Norman Miller. And I often think of that, you know what a woomer is, don't you, Graham? Like a woomer basically is a sort of a stick that you hold onto the back of a spear and you throw it, and it actually becomes much more powerful. And with a woomer, a good Aboriginal spear thrower can throw it 2 to 3 times further than a normal throw. And I just felt that prophetically, Pastor Norman and Pastor Barbara Miller, because they were there together, and there's actually other Indigenous people that actually can see the other Indigenous leaders there in that crowd. There was a woomer effect spiritually, and this became quite a weapon of war, if you like, in the spirit realm. A weapon of war, a weapon of blessing, a weapon of grace to see our nation come back to God. And we haven't seen it yet, but we have seen some amazing things happen, haven't we? We now have a Christian Prime Minister, is that right?
Yep, yeah, we do. Scott Morrison, beautiful man and a beautiful family. And that is a miracle he got elected, because, may the Lord had helped us, I mean, if the opposition got in. And the same overseas with Hillary Clinton, who was nominated and by Planned Parenthood for the Margaret Sanger Award. And she, they're killers, they're born killers. They don't want to kill unborn and all this, and so did the feminist movement within the Labor Party. It's just shocking. And now we've got all these things that are happening. We've got some of the most liberal laws in the world now, in Victoria and Queensland, and they want to introduce them elsewhere, not to mention safe schools. But thankfully, these things are going to be defeated, because we know that God's kingdom will come to earth, won't that right?
Absolutely. And look,
Lord's Prayer.
God's kingdom comes in our hearts. Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you. And so the challenge is for Christians. What would you say as we wrap up this interview, Graham? What would you say to believers? What advice would you give them as to what they can do to be part of changing the world?
Well, I think that it's very important to be the salt and light that God has called us to, as in Matthew, and it's important that we are transformational, that we redeem our culture and get into education, get in politics, get into the media. And I've just shared a few of those that God has prepared in advance for me to do, as Ephesians 2:10 said. And I just think that we can raise up a new generation of young people that will do that, who will be fearless, who will change this nation and redeem it. And we will be a force to be reckoned with, because there's certainly, in the early days, in the early missionary days of Australia, there was a map of Australia. And I'd just love to share that with you a bit later, Warwick, but it's a map of Australia with rays going out all over the Pacific and Southeast Asia, into Africa, India, and it was the gospel coming out from Australia. So I believe we're in a new era, a new generation, and may God bless a new generation as they pray and act and form a new nation based on His word.
Based on His word. And the scripture says, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord.
Amen.
Graham, it's just been a delight to talk to you. Thank God for you. Thank God for beautiful Pam, your wife. Thank God for your family. And thank God for your leadership in our nation over many, many, many years.
Yeah, thank you, Warwick.
Pioneering, working hard behind the scenes, bringing people together with the National Alliance of Christian Leaders, pioneering Christian radio, helping pioneer Christian radio in Australia, help starting a Christian schooling in Australia in those very early years in the late 70s, early 80s, and being involved in so many different things for the glory of God. So it's been great talking to you, and God's blessings to you.
Go on, Warwick. Pleasure.